Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Eddie G's Music World. Current date, September 25th, 2018. I was supposed to do a show yesterday, but things get crazy in my life sometimes, and it had to be put off till today. So it's all right. My legions of fans will understand, I'm pretty sure. Okay. We're going to go get started on something. Let me get to it. I'm going to go and start on the top 500 countdown, which is Rolling Stones, because we did get you pretty close to the end of that countdown last time. And I figure at this point I might as well finish it off for you, and then we'll have a few stories about some rock stars that I have to discuss. Okay, I think we were at number 8 on the list. And let's get back to it currently so I can finish it off. And then we're going to discuss John Denver, AC/DC, and Denver Campbell. Quite a mix. So the last time was Hey Jude, was number 8. Number 7, let's get to the end of this. Chuck Berry, Johnny Be Good. Okay, a lot was said about Chuck Berry last show because he shows up quite a bit on this list. So obviously I have always some new story to talk about his music. But, talk a lot about the Beatles and how they were influenced by Chuck Berry. So no surprise that he's up here with the song Johnny Be Good. He did write it, but there was a lot of controversy with his writing where there was some other guy, Johnson, that was in his band that he had a lot to do with the writing, but in the music business, guys who have a lot to do with things don't always get their pay. And he always cried, or not necessarily cried. This guy, Johnny Johnson, I think it was, whatever his name was, he always complained that, he didn't really get paid well. He was, never credited as a co-writer when he did co-write. But anyway, Chuck did make this a big song. And, of course, the Beatles loved Chuck Berry and found him a major influence. So it's no surprise they're both up towards the top of the top 500 songs of all time. And I've heard this song many times. I just heard it a few days ago to refresh my memory, along with some Elvis songs. And it's got that phenomenal guitar, and it's got the story, and Chuck's dancing. So let it be at number 7. Okay, getting close to the end. Number 6, another guy who had something to do with Chuck Berry since he took the Beach Boys. Brian Wilson had one of his songs sound a little bit, Sweet Little 16 sounded a little bit like one of Chuck Berry's songs, and there was a court fight. Not a court fight, but I think Brian Wilson had to go run over and give him a bunch of money to calm him down. But this song is Good Vibrations, so of course, nothing to do with Chuck Berry. I digressed. And it was well known to be pretty innovative. It had an instrument in it, tremolin. I forget the name of that instrument. Theremin or something like that. Theremin, I think, where Brian Wilson had to go around searching for this kind of instrument far and wide in the college circuit, or somebody had the instrument, and he needed it for this recording. So this was well done by him, and we know Brian Wilson had to cut Mike Love in for a few million because there was a lot of disputes about what he contributed, and he wasn't paid for all the things he did. And then, he said, "Sorry, cousin, I have to go to court because you're not going to just write me a check for the money that I'm owed from the record sales." Because he wrote half of, wrote a lot of the words, but it was settled and it was done, and there was payment. I guess Mike Love and Brian Wilson are on reasonable terms, although the reunion of the Beach Boys was a few years ago, 2012, and We're back to the same old, where the Beach Boys showed up this summer in Montreal to some just for laughs outdoor concert, and now Brian Wilson's showing up in a few weeks to some show in some other place. So they're no longer, the tour was a one-off thing where they all got together. But Good Vibrations was amazingly innovative, so I don't have any real issue with saying it's worth being considered at number 6 for the Rolling Stone Top 500 of all time. And we are getting close to number 1. Don't you worry, we will get there today. Don't look it up yourself or it'll take all the fun out of it. Let's get to number 5 now. Aretha Franklin, Respect. Okay, a lot has been said about her lately. She just passed away, so this song has been played to death on the radio. Too much, because there was about 2 or 3 weeks of attention paid to her with funerals and retrospects on her career and sadness from across the music industry. So they must have played Respect about 100 times on TV in about 2 weeks. So as much as I like that song, I'm a little tired of it now. But can't blame Aretha Franklin for getting a song played on TV and radio too much because she passed away. Wrote it. It was Otis Redding who wrote it. And he did his own version, which was not the hit version. So later on, of course, Aretha did do it, and it did go all the way into the top. I think it was number 1. So good song. No problem with it being this high. I'm happy that it got the respect, so to speak, that it deserves. Number 4. Let's see if I can guess what it is. I'm going to say that number 4. Who haven't we heard from? There's been a lot of Dylan, a lot of Beatles, a lot of Rolling Stones. I don't know if they're going to stick them this high up in the chart. I'm not sure what this guy who compiles these songs thinks of the Rolling Stones, so maybe we'll leave them out. Zeppelin's been in there a little. I guess we'll just go with the Beatles and see if it is. No, Marvin Gaye, What's Going On? Okay, didn't think that would be up there. Yeah, it's got that feel to it. He co-wrote it with somebody named Ronaldo Benson and Al Cleveland, and he produced it, so good for him. It was an environmental song and peace and all that, and played a lot. Number 2 hit, and of course, part of his run, his continuing, like he evolved from the 60s pop to the 70s protest sound, and did a great job of evolving and changing with the trends. So we all know the song. There's not a hell of a lot I can add to the song, talking about all the ins and outs of the recordings or who played on the record. It's well known, and like I said, another example of a song that should be in the top 5. It's the guy's taste who comes up with this list, so whatever he thinks is such an amazing, if it's worth it, it's up to him. I just talk about it. I don't have much to do with I don't have anything to do with the ranking of these songs. I just find it interesting. And of course, poor Marvin was shot by his father, so he lasted to 81. Unfortunately, it was after one of his more ridiculous songs, Sexual Healing, which is kind of, I don't know, it's okay, but a little juvenile. Number 3, I should have guessed before I looked, but I just looked, so it's too late to guess. John Lennon, wow, he didn't show up yet on this list as far as this song, Imagine. And yeah, of course, we've said it before, the guy who was in town last week, McCartney, gets all the hoopla about him being the genius, and he self-promotes when he's on doing interviews how he's, did a lot of the writing on his own. But, the Imagine was John's own song, wrote it himself, solo career. Amazingly, Spector was the producer. Those guys, I guess they could deal with each other. They're both pretty wild characters, and Yoko produced it too. Wow, didn't know that. She was in the studio and actually had a part of the decision making of the sound of the song and recording. So that's news to me that Yoko produced it. She's still around, obviously. She just came out with a new record, which, other than being ridiculed, didn't really get a lot of attention in the media, because when you're 81 or 2 and you sing kind of wildly, there's not exactly a big lineup at the record store or downloading of her music that's going to create all this excitement. But good for that. John Lennon, Imagine, at number 3 on the Billboard sorry, the Rolling Stone Top 500 Songs of All Time. That came out in October 1971. Now, there's only 2 more songs. You'd think I'd know which, maybe I could guess. Who would this guy think is the second and first best song? Well, he did say, well, I'm going to have to assume it's the Beatles just because this guy seems to be really into them. So let's try number 2. Let's see. Rolling Stones, see? I thought the guy wouldn't think the Rolling Stones deserved to be up this high, but I guess he did. And like all Rolling Stones songs, if not most, if not all, it's Jagger and Richards wrote it, and Andrew Loog Oldham was the producer. 14 weeks at number 1. Well, it was on the charts 14 weeks, and it went to number 1. And, of course, it's famously known for the song that was in his head, Keith Richards, when he was sleeping. It came to him in a dream, and very much pop culture references about commercials and smoking cigarettes and all this stuff that was in the media. And maybe he saw the television and saw the commercial, and it seeped into his mind, and that influenced him. But he opened up his tape and threw it on there with whatever way he did, probably guitar, and sang maybe. Of course, he's not the main singer, so smartly left the singing to Mick. And it defined the group and got played a lot. And, well, good idea to put it up this high. And it was original, still is. Nobody's going to ever come close to that type of music. They can't get close to that type of music, even they've been at it over all these years and still come out with records. Of course, Jones was on there at the time. He's still alive. Wyman, Charlie Watts. And look, it's what Richards reflected in Keith Richards at the time, and musically mostly. I think Jagger threw in the words, if not all of the words, but the music, of course, is important. So then they threw all those tapes together and redid it. And, of course, that riff was famous, and the feedback and everything. And they came out with this classic, Satisfaction. And, we are happy that it was done. Now, we're just saying maybe there was a little bit of a Chuck Berry sounded a bit like a Chuck Berry song. They say 30 Days, something like that, some song of Chuck Berry that might have influenced the music. Well, can I guess number 1 on the Rolling Stones Top 500 Countdown of All Time? We're at the point where we're ending this extravaganza, which started probably in April or May of this year. Come on, let's see. I keep saying Beatles will be in the top 2, and they weren't at number 2, so maybe they're at number 1, and maybe pick Revolution or something like that. I don't know. Would you think that? Or I Feel Fine. I don't know. Try the Beatles. Number 1 is Bob Dylan, Like a Rolling Stone. Oh, this worship for Bob Dylan. Okay. We all know who he is. We all know he wrote it. It's the story, about some things that went on in his life, like all these songs are. Al Cooper played the organ. I forgot to do the drum roll for number 1 being Bob Dylan, Like a Rolling Stone. But I'm not Fred Norris. I don't have the sound effects prepped. I just, I did it. It's number 1 anyway. And look, I don't know. Is there a lot to say about this? I guess you have to give credit a lot to Al Cooper since he played the organ on it. It was a big part of the song. And let me see if there's more interesting stuff to add to this. It's just something that Bob Dylan wrote up and turned it into a classic, I guess. And I don't know. Is there a lot more to say? He was the great, brilliant folk music guy, and he pulled it off. Number 1 to this guy. I don't know if I would say he's number 1 out of all the 500 songs because, it's just a good song to me. But it rolls well, and I guess it's up to the guy that came up with the lists, not up to me. All right, we're going to switch now. I'm going to say that I'm going to start going down memory lane with some discussions about specific acts that I found interesting enough to prepare for. I know a lot about all these three acts, so I didn't have to really do a lot of research. Tell you what, two are kind of laid-back guys, and one is a heavy metal band. So I'll start with laid-back guy, switch to heavy metal band, then go back to the laid-back guy. By that time, we're pretty sure going to come close to the end of the show, which may not even get on the computer this week because YouTube gave me some new button to press that I don't know if I did it correctly. Like YouTube, I don't make any money. I don't ask you to do anything for me. There's nothing out there that you need to do, but don't change the buttons that I press to do my show just because you want to feature some new exciting button that you want people to press to go somewhere else and all that. Leave me alone. Anyway, okay, we'll start off with John Denver. He was kind of a quiet guy. His real name was, I think last name was John, it was Duchendorf. And he started off in a small town kind of thing, boy next door type of personality, you know, not an assuming guy, not a flashy guy, you know. He's this John Denver, kind of at the time Duchendorf, but he had his dark side too. I mean, he wasn't always this upbeat guy, but he came across that way. He always, when he started getting success and writing songs, he definitely let his environmentalism in his personality shine through. A lot of the Rocky Mountain High type of songs, you know, all about the environment, and that was his thing. He did write Leaving on a Jet Plane, and he didn't really expect much to happen with that. It was a song that was prepared. He wrote it and didn't expect it to become a hit, you know, like none of these unknowns really do. He wasn't unknown at the time, but it passed around. Maybe one person heard it, and somehow it ended up on the record company's desk of Peter, Paul, and Mary, and they did their song, and that was a big hit for them, top 5, I believe. So that helped John Denver majorly, getting out of the obscurity which he was in, which is drifting around in coffee houses for peanuts and starving pretty much. You know, he also had a song called Calypso, which is about John Cousteau. That was later on, but it's just a little anecdote about him, about his environmental take on a lot of things, talking about the sea and the water and all the beautiful things. I remember also, the fact is, when his career ended, he writes a song about leaving on a jet plane, and then he ends up dying on the airplane because he took a little tiny, he learned how to fly, so he wasn't an amateur. He knew how to fly, and he took some small prop plane somewhere and crashed. There was a story about that, which I could have found out more details about how he died in the plane, but really I don't think anybody cares, including me. He wasn't really much of an actor as far as that goes, but he was in the Oh God movie with George Burns. He played his typical nerdy self, you know, where he's going through stuff and God comes to him. It was a pretty good movie overall. He came from New Mexico. As a kid, sang in church and must have impressed people with that because he does have a pretty nice voice. Like Roger Waters from Pink Floyd, he studied architecture. I believe that's what Roger Waters was doing. Not that there's any connection between Roger Waters and John Denver. There's none, musically or otherwise. And, you know, that was his path. You know, a lot of times people, they kind of get told to do certain things to make a career for themselves, but they end up drifting off into something else. And obviously it worked out in the long run for John Denver, since the architecture he was studying didn't turn out to be a major endeavor for him. So he moved to LA about 1964. He worked with New Christy Minstrels, who had a song, Walk Right In? Yeah, I think it was Walk Right In. And that looked like he was heading somewhere. But the new Christian Minstrels, they kind of like one hit. I don't think that really materialized into a major career, because a lot of these bands, they have a song and maybe the guy makes a few bucks. But anyway, it made him. It got into a point where he got a contract offer from Capitol Records in 1964. So they were believing in the guy, but then they, to kind of move him in the pop direction when he's got a country style. I don't know. The record company gave him a little time, and most of these types of these projects don't work out, and he was dropped. Well, I don't know how many years, but not that long after that. Then he was in Chad Mitchell Trio. I may be jumping around from one top part to the other. I don't do things in order, like he was born, he's 3, he was 7, he was 10. I'm not doing things in order. I'm just taking the most important things out of his career and transferring them to you, so you can learn about stuff. So, if you ever go back and check up my discussions, it's not going to be all in order exact. I'm doing it off the top of my head with little notes that kind of push me along. He was in Chad Mitchell Trio for a bit, another example of kind of like a tiny bit of popularity. Looked like it was going somewhere and didn't seem to materialize in the long term. Back to clubs, drifting around, still trying to find his success. And he never really, at that point it looked kind of like grim. Here he is, he wrote this and did that, and he's still trying to find his way. At some point he married Annie. I forget her last name, I don't think it matters. And that, of course, led later on to Annie's song, the #1 song. The Annie song that he recorded and wrote was when he reconciled with Annie, because they had a breakup, or I don't know if they were divorced, but they had a definite breakup of some kind. Reconciled, and then that inspired him to write the song, Annie's song, which is pretty nice song. Went to #1. But with all these struggles and record companies turning him down, in the mid-60s, he was kind of like, didn't look great for the guy, but most people end up drifting around and going to other work, but he persevered, and RCA, they took a shot at him. So he was dropped by a company, then the RCA took a shot at him. Then they had 3 albums with them. They all didn't do well. They all bombed. And their singles and the albums, and again, we're back to kind of, we're already at about 7 or 8 years of small successes with a lot of like pitfalls and like dips in his career and drops in his success. And so, takes a lot to stick with something. Look, I've had tried to do radio for many years, and never got as far as he did, even though he didn't succeed that well. He did better than I did trying to do my dream job. Okay, then we get to the very early 1970s. Things change, obviously, since the guy became a big star. He couldn't have lingered in being a loser forever as far as success goes. He got that song, Take Me Home, Country Roads. And he wrote that with someone else, and that really started him on the path of success. That got him in the charts, and that was the beginning of his success. He got on TV shows, did variety shows. I think he had his own show for a bit. So that was like obviously the beginning of his flight to stardom. He came up with Rocky Mountain High. That was big. There was still some. Then there was a little bit of a backlash towards him because he was a country singer, and maybe his songs started to eventually dip a little bit. Maybe after 5-6 years of this, he no longer was the pop star anymore, because he had about 12 hits. It's not easy to do, but the country scene was kind of saying, not too sure we want this guy back now. know, because he had done his TV show. He had all these hits. They were drifting in the pop domain. Though these country diehards back then, they were pretty fussy about a guy who slips into the pop world, and then then maybe they weren't crazy about him in the country world anymore. They might still be like that. I don't really follow it that closely. I remember hearing something that this made me think he's not such a great guy. He once bought a seat for his guitar, so he paid for his airline ticket, and he paid for a second airline ticket to put his guitar next to him. And some woman wanted to sit in that chair on the plane, and he says, "No, that's for my guitar." So he also adopted a couple of kids. I looked up one of his sons, but I couldn't find him anywhere on the internet, so I'm not sure what happened to these kids as far as what they ended up doing. He even had a Learjet when he was at his peak of success. So there we have pretty much a reasonably thorough discussion about John Denver. A lot of these acts kind of follow this path of obscurity, success, failure, and in his case, early death. And my opinion of him overall, liked his voice, pretty good songwriter, despite the fact that he kind of painted himself into a corner of looking like a nerd. It's not his fault, really. He just looked that way. He had his little granny glasses and blonde hair, But my music tastes are quite varied. So with a guy like this, I can kind of like his music, and it's not as that outrageous that I can go on to the next band and like them too. So we go from there to a bunch of wild, crazy metal guys. So, okay, we're off to the next topic, AC/DC. I found that, I've seen them live 3 times, so I'm a big fan of theirs. They started off, I think, from what I remember, they were from Scotland, and then they moved to Australia. So that's how that's the beginning of this band. We all know of the 2 brothers, Malcolm Young and Angus Young were the brothers. And there was George Young, who was in the Easy Beats, who had a hit before AC/DC was even formed. So George Young was around in the Easy Beats, the older brother. Then his other brothers, Malcolm and Angus, got together. There was some singer, Cliff Williams, I believe, that started off with AC/DC. I saw a couple of songs on YouTube with this guy. I mean, he was decent. He had a good voice. He had those tight pants, Maybe it looked like it would turn into something, but things transpired. Maybe they were frustrated. They weren't that big at the time with this guy. Actually, not Cliff Williams. That's a mistake. That's the bass player. The original guy. Oh boy, let's see if I can remember his name. I didn't take a note, so I guess I'm guilty of not preparing extensively. So there was a singer out at the very beginning that ended up not lasting. And then from there, maybe it'll come to me or I'll figure it out what his name was. But anyway, he wasn't a big part of the band. He had almost nothing to do with it. It only lasted a year or so or 2. Let's bring on the main guy, Bon Scott. He was the singer. He was the guy with the bad teeth. He was the guy who was a massive, massive drinker. He got in trouble. I think he was in jail for fighting. He was like major rebel rouser. So, but he had that swagger, and he had the good metal voice, so he was a better fit than the first guy. And so he was the singer. Then you had the 2 brothers, Angus and Malcolm, and then Cliff Williams may or may not have been an original, but he showed up early on. and Phil Rudd was the main drummer in the band. So that was the way that was the bulk of, that was where they were, when at the beginning stages. This is how the band was set up. There was times, they got in a lot of bad publicity at certain times. There was a Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. He actually left an AC/DC hat at the scene of one of his crimes where he killed one of the women. So, there was a lot of devil worship rumors, talks. I mean, AC/DC this, they're behind, AC/DC they got their name from the back of a sewing machine. It said AC/DC, referring to the different plugs or batteries or whatever they use in the sewing machine. But a lot of people thought there was a gay reference, because AC/DC means you go both ways, sexually, men, women, men to men, women to women. But obviously that wasn't the main. That wasn't real. That was just somebody who referred to that reference, but it didn't mean much. So they obviously, with George being the Easy Beats, he was shocked that the boys were doing so well without him. He was doing his own thing, but George Young ended up finding them worthwhile, and he did produce them. George Young, which the guy from the Easy Beats, and Craig Evans. I found the name of the original singer. So the song that he did is "Can I Get Next to You, Girl?" If you have time and you want to hear the original lead singer of AC/DC sing before Bon Scott, go look up "Can I Get Next to You, Girl." I like the song. I never heard it until I listened to it on YouTube, so it was no way near a hit here. It was a complete nothing. But anyways, I backed up to give you the real name of the main singer, Craig Evans. But let's get back to Bon, because we were focusing on him, but I bounced back and forth a little bit. Bon was in a group called the Valentines and Fraternity before he ended up pulling into the AC/DC group. So they did go to London to try to get bigger and to establish themselves. After 2-3 years of being with Bon, and they got signed to Atlantic Records. And well, we all know that they were massive. They toured around with Bon, got in a lot of trouble with the drinking all the time. Malcolm Young was quoted as saying that they were a heavy party band and always drinking and living together in a house. There was crazy things like 3 fans got trampled at one of the AC/DC shows, which was a major bad reflection on the band. Maybe they felt like it was their fault that they didn't have good enough security. I mean, that type of thing happened to the Who, where 2 or 3 guys died in Cincinnati a few years later. So this happens. Even with AC/DC, there was fans crushed when people try to get to the front of the stage. They're all rushed. But lots of trials and tribulations. Then, of course, Bon Scott, at some point with his drinking, he sat in a car overnight and drank some more, and he assaulted. He choked on his own vomit, and he died. So that was the end of that, and the band was kind of wondering what the next step would be. What are we going to do? Here we are with this big success, and our lead singer is dead, so we don't know. They weren't sure what to do, but as it happened, there was another guy who was in a band called Geordie, which I liked. I found one of their 45 ones, and of course it was Brian Johnson. So he auditioned for AC/DC to be in the band, and wow, that was no mistake. They ended up staying with him, recorded Back in Black. All that 15-20 million copies were sold, and wow, I mean, they've sold probably 80 million copies in the US, I think more than the Rolling Stones. So that was a massively long stint with AC/DC. So let's say it started in 1980. Throughout that period, let's say towards the end, in the last few years, major changes happened to AC/DC, to the point where There's rumors that they're still together, but it looked pretty grim for a bit. I mean, Phil Rudd was fired in the last few years because he had uttered death threats to someone, and the police obviously didn't like that, and he got kicked out of the band. They weren't returning his calls, and that was one thing. The bassist, Cliff Williams, who I mentioned earlier, just retired. He said he's gone, leaving. And then you also have Brian Johnson being fired because he had hearing problems. So he says, here, I have hearing problems. I made it public. I can't hear as well. And all of a sudden, he opens his door and he sees all his stuff that AC/DC must have had some of his gear somewhere, and they just threw it back to him and said, that's it, you're out of the band. And then, of course, they trotted at Axl Rose to finish off a tour because Johnson was out and they still had another 10, 15 shows or whatever it was left to perform. And I heard a bit of Axl Rose singing AC/DC songs. I'm not going to say it's bad. It was okay. I mean, Axl Rose is a good singer, and he kind of sounds like a scruffy voice. And in that sense, maybe it was the right thing to do. If you really don't want to have Johnson in there, you throw in Axl Rose. I don't care. I've seen AC/DC 3 times, and they've been with Brian Johnson each time, and I have no complaints. But now we're at a weird spot because there's a picture taken which purportedly shows Brian Johnson, Phil Rudd, Angus Young meeting with also Stevie, who's the nephew of Angus and Malcolm Young. So they were meeting somewhere. Maybe so. There's rumors now that they might be having a reboot of the band. Of course, I didn't mention all through this that 6-7 years ago, Malcolm Young had dementia and he couldn't perform anymore. So he was in a hospital of some kind, or rehab, or kind of like an old age home or hospital, and couldn't remember his guitar parts. So, of course, if you can't do your own guitar parts, they had to sadly let him out of the band, and maybe he accepted that. I don't know. And then, to make matters worse, Malcolm Young passed away too. So, I mean, how many things can... A lot less things break up bands, let's say that. But somehow this band stayed... They wouldn't officially break up. With all these things that happened. Drummer getting fired. Brian Johnson getting fired. Second rhythm guitarist, co-writer, Malcolm Young dying. Did I forget anything? Well, the other singer died. Bon Scott. I mean, look, you expect a band like that to hang up the microphone. But no, there's rumors that AC/DC might stick around. I mean, Angus Young is the leader of the band because he's the focus. He's got the schoolboy outfit. He runs around like a freak. He's playing his amazing guitar. So as long as he's there, and you somehow get Brian Johnson back in the band, there's no reason why they can't start touring again and, well, throw in another CD if you guys want. And I've seen AC/DC with Stevie Young, the nephew, and I didn't notice a difference that he took Malcolm's part. It didn't seem to make a huge problem for me to hear it with the nephew. So I've seen it with Malcolm Young too, twice, and then it's the third time was the one where it was Stevie Young. So if they think they can pull it off, they want to go to that effort and produce more records and do more tours. And I'm not saying I'll go to see them because I've seen them 3 times, and I'm getting a little tired of being crunched into stadiums and arenas and watching concerts and spending $200-300 a shot. So I'm seeing a lot less shows than I used to. So I'm not saying I'm going to be at the door buying another AC/DC ticket, but good for them. Let them go. A lot of people love them. They bring in a lot of fans. They make a lot of money for everybody, especially themselves. So if it turns out that they want to keep touring, then I don't see any reason why they shouldn't. Let them keep going. More power to them. So we'll see what's on the horizon for AC/DC. You'll know within a year, because a band this old, and they're not going to think about it for 5 years. They're going to have to they're going to have to make a move and establish themselves on the road and in the studio again, or hang it up. But I guess they'll keep on, because it looks like these guys want to continue. Brings me to my third act that I want to discuss. He's more in the pop country vein. He just died recently. I'm saying a year to a year and a half ago. Glenn Campbell, quite an amazing life he's led. He's from Wyoming, and he one of these poor sharecropper type of guys, picking fruit, blah blah blah, and when he was a kid, and didn't come from money, no rich family to help him out in life. He started off like he did a lot of these local things in his area, like a lot of these people do. And again, like a lot of these successful people, he had to eventually go to LA to get any work, because you can't stay in Wyoming and little hick towns and make your way in music. You're going to have to get yourself to a place where you can get more work. Well, his beginning was kind of started out as a session musician, probably part of the Wrecking Crew, which was the LA studio musician groups. They played in a lot of sessions in studio of let's say pop songs. A lot of these pop singers, they didn't have their own band. They got paid by the record company, and the record company went to these brilliant studio guys, and Glenn Campbell was a great guitarist. So he says that he was on over 500 sessions, 540 or 50 sessions, which meant he really did a lot of work. And he said he made a great living at it. And I wish I went and did the work to find out which sessions he was on, but there were quite a bit. I mean, if you're in LA and you're part of that scene and they're calling you constantly to be on records, there's probably out of that 550 song, at least 100 hits or more that this guy played guitar. And unless you really work hard at it, it's not easy to know which songs he played, and it doesn't matter all that much which of all the songs he did play. There was also a Beach Boys tour that he did in the 60s, because Brian Wilson, he pulled out of the touring version of the Beach Boys for a bit, and he took on the bass for that tour. I think it was 6 or 8 months. And all members of the Beach Boys plus Glenn Campbell said it was a great, enjoyable experience. And I guess it was temporary, since obviously Brian, the Beach Boys were always changing up tours. They were starting, they were stopping. Maybe Wilson came back a few years later. I'm not sure, but he's well known to have been one of the Beach Boys on the touring scene. So that lasted for a bit. The hits didn't come right away. People were shocked because they knew him pretty well in the early days when he was a session guy, and he was a pretty clean living guy. He didn't have much connection to drinking and drugs, but they say it sort of slowly crept up on him in the mid to late 60s. He started drinking a lot, started doing a lot of drugs, and that kind of it crept into his career. He did at some point, after a few years, he got his own TV show. I remember seeing clips of this, kind of a corny variety show type of thing. At the time, that was the type of show that was popular, so he went along and did that and made a good living at it. Funny enough, he was part of a group called the Champs when he was really younger, and they had that song Tequila. So he was in the sessions. Not sure if he was on the touring group of the Champs. They only did have that one song that was popular anyway. Other sessions that he did with Jan and Dean, he did sessions on their records, part of the Spectre gang, so he got work that way. I know when he was a kid, he almost drowned. His brother was seen talking about that and said, "Wow, he went in the water, and that was it. It looked like it was the end of my brother." And obviously, at some point, they did pull him out, and he made it through that. Dean Martin was another band, another act that he played sessions on some of his hits. It was the reason why he ended up getting really big. Part of the reasons was this guy Jimmy Webb. He wrote some songs for Glenn Campbell, or maybe he wrote them and then eventually they just became popular with Glenn Campbell, in mind. He ended up singing, and he arranged some of the songs, Jimmy Webb, too, like By the Time I Get the Phoenix, Wichita Lineman. That was those kind of songs, very moody and orchestrated, and it did help get Glenn accomplished in the music business by hooking up with this Jimmy Webb, because of course he's the one that did a lot of the writing. I don't know if Glenn really was a writer. Maybe he did, but he's not really known as a writer. He was a great singer, phenomenal guitarist. He did some movies too. There was two or three that stood out. He was in True Grit with John Wayne. I saw a bit of that. Kind of helped out his career, propelled him into the limelight more and more and more and more. And there were also a lot of romances. I mean, an early marriage, then of course the drinking and the cheating. These are not shocking revelations I'm making here. Then there was some other one, and he had kids with that one. And I know there was an estranged daughter from the first marriage that he didn't really have much to do with. And later on in his life, when he was older, she showed up and started becoming part of his shows and part of his life more. So she reconnected with him, which is nice to hear. There was a very dark period in his career which made him drink a lot more and carry on, because he became corny. He became like John Denver, in that, his songs were no longer cool or hip or whatever. I don't like to use the word cool, but no longer something that was fun to be a part of. He was old-fashioned type of thing. So his records kind of moved into the bombing. They were bombing like crazy, just some ballady stuff that didn't connect with the audience. And I think at some point his record company dropped him, or maybe they just put him off for a while. I don't know. But then along came a song from Larry Weiss, who did his own song, and it was Rhinestone Cowboy, and that was rejuvenated Glenn Campbell's career, and that really helped him out, because that went to #1, and all of a sudden this kind of washed up pop cowboy type of guy is back in the limelight again. And then he followed that up with Country Boy, You've Got Your Feet in LA, and maybe two other ones. And there he was, back into the pop mainstream again. So Southern Nights was huge. So, the guy, he came back, which is very hard to do. I just see on golf that, Tiger Woods was not doing great for a while, and he just won a major. So these things happen, and good for him. I like Rhinestone Cowboy. I hear it once in a while, and it's a soaring song. I like Country Boy a bit, Southern Nights. These are all great pop songs. But through it all, divorces and estranged kids. Then he had this major crazy one-year fling with Tanya Tucker, where in the middle of that she was a boozer and a druggie, and maybe he was married at the time when he met her, so that was like a tabloid crappy thing that went on. It embarrassed him a lot. He was very, very much in the news for bad things. He was not carrying on in a proper way, and people were estranged from him. His friends maybe got a little concerned that he went off the deep end with all these flings and binges, booze, and his records, again, they never really did come back after the like 1980, even though he had the rebirth, it kind of turned out again to kind of put him back out there. I mean, he was getting older, and guys that are in their 50s are not usually going to have pop hits anymore. So after that, he did stop the drugs. He cleaned his act up, and you know, there were accusations even of that he hit one of these women. I don't know. This is all tabloid talk. I don't know what was true and what wasn't. But at least he cleaned up his act and got a little older in time, and pushed on and still did shows. He developed dementia late in his life, and he had that problem to deal with. And interestingly enough, in an interview I saw, it said that his dementia was pretty bad, but when he had to remember the words to his songs, he could do that. So he still did shows later in life with the dementia, which is impressive that, you know, he can remember the words to a song, so he can still work. And then, unfortunately, it's inevitable, so I don't get all these sad people when a big star dies. You know, what's the big deal? We're all going to die. But anyway, Glenn died, and pretty much wraps up. I know that he said that once 10 years ago or so, he actually had one of his old songs, like a rap band contacted him and asked to take snippets of his song, samples of one of his songs. I think it was Southern Nights, and put a rap song towards it. And he said he was all for it. He said, great, go ahead, use it. I don't know what happened to that song, if it was a big hit or probably not. But he allowed that to happen, which is shows that he was pretty current. He tried to be current in that sense. So I've gone through most of my three big stars, and I've got about not a lot of time left. But there's time to try a little something new out. Let's see if I can track down what I next want to discuss. And I'm going to go through another list because, you know, it inspires me to talk. And it gives me something to discuss. And I know a lot about music, so I have mostly comments on everybody that's on every list, unless it's some obscure reggae music or something. Okay, so Rolling Stone has another list. Let's dig into it a bit for about a few minutes. And it starts off with the greatest guitarists of all time. Again, we're back to the same situation where it's someone's opinion. Doesn't mean it's true. I don't know enough about guitar playing to say it's true or not, but let's see what number 100 is. Number 100 is Lindsey Buckingham. And of course, it's well known that he drifted around with Stevie Nicks, who was his girlfriend at the time, and ended up being in a studio down the hall from Mick Fleetwood when they were doing some Fleetwood Mac work, and that's how he got discovered, because it was Buckingham Nicks for a while, and, you know, Buckingham Nicks, they weren't a success, but when Mick Fleetwood pulled him into the band, that certainly changed Lindsey's life. So Lindsey was just either fired or he quit Fleetwood Mac in 2018. I don't really know or care which one of those two things occurred. And they're going out on tour with Mike Campbell from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, replacing him. So we'll see how that works out. But he went from folky type music to banjo type songs when he was young, and then moved into, like, you know, matured as a guitarist. Was a great songwriter, definitely guitarist. He's up there and deserves to be given credit for being a great guitarist. He had a couple of songs on his own, which was like Holiday Road and other ones too. And I've seen him live, and definitely holds his own as far as that goes. Saved Fleetwood Mac, took them from a band that was kind of lingering with older members, and rejuvenated that with his girlfriend, who he broke up with, obviously, Stevie Nicks. So, okay, saw you play live, Lindsey. You were the man. You didn't have any issues playing guitar live. So, and I've heard you on your record. So, okay, you're number 100 according to Rolling Stone's top 100 guitarists of all time. Number 99, let's see. Let's see who it is. I'm not going to guess. Thurston Moore, you know. I mean, the guy was in Sonic Youth. who I barely know, but they didn't take the world by storm. But a lot of people liked Sonic Youth. There may be one or two songs that I've heard, and there was a lot of feedback in their music. I mean, I don't have a lot to say about somebody who's in a band that I barely know. I mean, I know so many bands, but I don't know every single member of every band, their strengths and weaknesses. Forgot to say this, so I'll say it now. You're listening to Eddie G's Music World edition of retrospecting of three artists today, which was Glenn Campbell, AC/DC, and John Denver. Plus, I finished off the Rolling Stones top 500 songs of all time. Number one was Like a Rolling Stone by Bob Dylan. And now I'm digging into the top 100 guitarists of all time, according to Rolling Stone. Let's see if I know more about number 98, because I don't know much about 99. Let's see. Alex Lifeson, well, I know quite a bit about him. I've seen him live 5 times with Rush. Definitely innovative with his guitar style. You know, you could hear the riffing on 212 and 2112, I mean, and Xanadu. He's unbelievably a versatile guy as far as guitars go, and influenced a lot of bands like Metallica and so forth. Achieved massive success with Rush. They just hung up the band in the last year and a half because Neil Peart, I think he's had a lot of issues going on in his personal life and he's just burnt out and he doesn't want to play anymore. So these guys so far have not done anything without him, so they're leaving it alone for now. But it's a standout guitar work on Rush. So he does great solos. He's well known for them. And if you hear a song like Free Will, you hear all the extra work going into it. So for sure, Alex Lifeson, from what I can tell, I'm not a guitarist, has earned a spot in the top 100 based on all the work he's done with Rush for sure. Number 97 is Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols. Never did see them live. Could have gone. Didn't go. The kind of band the Sex Pistols is musically they were better than people gave them credit for because of Sid Vicious getting a bad rep that he couldn't play bass, and they just basically tossed him the bass so he can do something. And there might have been truth to that. Maybe he wasn't really much of a bass player. But Steve Jones, from what I heard, I mean, he had that soloing style in the Sex Pistols and played off of Johnny Rotten well, and had some solo work too, did other things, continued on. It said he inspired Slash, Billy Joe Armstrong, those kind of guys. And although you don't hear the Sex Pistols on the radio much, it's more that they were not given a lot of credit. I know they had that reunion where they made a bunch of cash about 10 years ago, and I think he was part of it. So whether he deserves this kind of positioning at 97, I mean, I'm not one to say he doesn't. And I'd have to overanalyze all the contributions Steve Jones has done. And the only one that I can think of off the top of my head is the Sex Pistols, but I'm not going to discount this guy's contribution. I'm going to say that, okay, here you are at number 97. So I'm going to wrap it up. We've got a lot left to do next week. I'm pretty sure I'll work myself into another great show. I'll come up with a few artists to discuss. I'll get back to this list. As long as I'm alive, and there's one or two people like Creeple Freak and maybe other people that listen, I'll do it. Because let's face it, got to do something with my time. Raising 2 kids, married, don't work. Let's do music discussion on Eddie G's Music World on YouTube. Please don't change the buttons on me anymore. YouTube, I'm trying to do my show. I don't have any guests. Just let me do it without making Creator Studio button turn into alphas or whatever hell else you said about the button. I don't like that button to be changed. Leave it the way it is. Don't make my life more complicated. Thank you very much, Eddie G's Music World, for September 25th, 2018. And we will be back at some point next week. And I'd be happy to speak to you then.